I want to first start off by talking about an experience you've had throughout the last several years. You actually are a driver for former President Trump's motorcade. What's that experience been like?
Oh, it's been an incredible experience. It began during the primaries in 2016. I also helped with Don Jr.'s trips to New Hampshire, and from there on in, when he was president, when Mr. Pence was vice president, and some of the cabinet members, and continuing to help them out with these things in the 2024 campaign all the way through. So yeah, it's been an incredible experience to see the just how things work logistically in the backgrounds, and the measures that are taken to both transport and protect our presidents, former presidents, and other dignitaries.
What is one aspect of that job that surprised you the most? Is there anything logistically that stood out to you?
Yeah, sure. I think it's just the sheer size of the entourages that are needed to both transport and protect dignitaries.
Now, taking a look at your social media, you've expressed support for the former president and his re-election bid. What sort of attracted you to his campaign?
I think what attracted me is the similar thing that attracted me to be a supporter. I first met him actually a decade ago this week in 2014 when he made a trip to New Hampshire, and it was a lot about the America First terminology wasn't really in place yet in those early years right before he ran for president, but I think that's what it was. I think it was his attitude on foreign policy, and then how it ties into domestic policy. And it's a little bit different, a little more populist than how the Republican Party had been, and I think that's the right direction we need to go in. And that's, I think, how we can win elections in the future, and also win over voters who might have been disaffected by candidates in the past.
Was there any aspect of his presidency between 2017 and 2021 that you didn't approve of, that you'd like to see him improve on if reelected?
I would say it's more of a constructive critique. I would say that there probably should be more people in the administration from top to bottom, and my hope is that there'll be more people who are expressing the same America First and, again, sort of populist message, and they align much more with the president. I know he had a bit of a hope when he first got to office that he'd have kind of a team of rivals that would, debate policy. But there were so many people that had to put themselves first, and they stab him in the back, or they do things that were against what the voters who put him into office reflected. Maybe no fault of his own or the administration's own, but I would just hope that everyone is on the same page, and I would expect that to be a much better, much more well-constructed thing in a second term.
It's interesting you use the term a team of rivals, because that's a phrase that Congressman Dean Phillips, who's also running for president, has used exactly to describe how his cabinet would be like if elected.
Sure. I'm not entirely familiar with Dean Phillips. I've seen a lot of ads. I have not got to run into him yet, but he does seem like someone who, on the Democratic side, is at least offering an alternative to President Biden not being on the ballot in New Hampshire, which is quite disappointing to all of us here. And I'm glad that that congressman has stepped up and has come to New Hampshire and has taken the time and effort to at least listen to the concerns of voters here.
Now let's talk a bit about your time as a state representative. Of course, you won 2 races in more southern New Hampshire. What do you feel were your keys to victory in those races? And were those techniques similar to what is required to win a presidential primary today?
I would say it's actually a lot different. When you're running for a local office, what I did the first time, and I was a 19 to 20-year-old college student, and I knocked doors. When I say I knocked doors, I knocked thousands of doors. I went personally myself and introduced myself to the voters at their door, gave them a card with my cell phone number on it, and if they ever had any concerns, to call me up. And I think that's a refreshing thing, that someone took the time to do that, and I was victorious in both those races, I think largely because of that. Obviously, with a presidential campaign, you can't do that. And I think the set of issues I ran on were very much reflective of what the voters were looking for at the time. The economy was down. The people were looking for someone who had a mind towards job creation, but also a mind towards keeping their taxes low, especially when you're running in southern New Hampshire in districts like that. It's definitely about preventing a sales tax or an income tax, but also keeping government in check so their local property taxes do not increase. So I think those types of messages, and it's broadly called here Preserving the New Hampshire Advantage, was something that really resonated and still does resonate today. Basically in the past decade, a lot of the issues have changed and the party's gone in a little more populist direction, and I think we should move to reflect that. But the methods in local races stay the same, but in a presidential, it's definitely a different animal.
How different is it winning a primary versus winning a general election in New Hampshire?
It's an excellent question. So, because last cycle I managed a campaign for Congress in CD2, and we were victorious in a primary where we were outspent significantly, almost 5-1 on those. I would say that there are definitely differences in how you message and the group you're messaging to. In a primary, you're definitely messaging to the limited set of voters that will turn out in the primary, which unfortunately isn't everybody. In a general election, it is a broader electorate. You can't entirely change your message. You don't do that, and you come across as disingenuous. When you're embracing things in a general election, you need to embrace a little more of a broad message that appeals to those who might be on the fence, but also those who you want to turn out. I hear a lot of people say they want to moderate their message when they go from primary to a general election. And it's tough in New Hampshire because you have such a short time window. But you might turn off people who came out and voted for you in the primary, but also who have very specific, I would say, policy things that they vote on. And the long and short of that is basically that you should stick to your principles. There are some more controversial things. I mean, obviously the abortion issue in 2022 was something we couldn't message correctly on. And I would say if we can find a message that appeals to a broader electorate on that, and still keep our pro-life principles, that would be a huge key to us to be able to win some congressional seats back.
What is that message, if I may? What sort of broad message do you think would resonate with more people?
Sure. I think we need to be clear that while we are pro-life, we're pro-life all the way through. We can't just be someone who is pro-birth. We need to be pro-life all the way through. We need to be pro-adoption. We need to be pro-foster. We need to be able to message that correctly and tell people that we're not just a pro-birth party, that we're a pro-life and whole life party.
The primary is in less than 24 hours. What are you expecting to see Tuesday night?
I am expecting to see, as far as the results, that President Trump will win a majority. I would say over 50% of the vote. That's about what I'm expecting. The field is definitely narrowed, as you've seen in the last couple of days, with Governor DeSantis dropping his campaign and Vivek Ramaswamy last week dropping, and both of them endorsing President Trump. I would actually expect to see President Trump also win a double-digit margin over Nikki Haley. She has had a surge lately, along with the help of Governor Sununu and some other forces like the AFP Action Group and a super PAC that's been spending significant money trying to boost her here, as everyone here can see with the amount of ads and the mailers you're seeing. But I would expect that the former president, who's been traveling the state and I've been along with him for a lot of these events, has been drawing massive crowds and massive interest. And like I said, I would expect to see over 50% for him in this state.
Now, you mentioned you expect to see over 50% for former President Trump, but I want to ask you, why is it you feel that former Ambassador Haley is polling better in the Granite State? Why it's become, what some would refer to as a two-person race at this point between her and the former president?
Yeah, sure. I would say that there are a couple forces at play here. In New Hampshire, independents, which are actually unenrolled to a party voters, so undeclared voters, can grab a ballot for either party, and with no significant Democratic primary, with apologies to Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson, but without President Biden on the ballot, there are a lot of Democratic voters who either might take a ballot and vote for, say, Nikki Haley, who may want to harm Donald Trump's chances of being renominated or reelected, or that they just simply don't have interest in that race, and she might be the one that appeals most to them. And how Governor Sununu ties into that, he has had the appeal greatly of a lot of those undeclared voters, and that's how he's been able to get his margins in the last couple of re-election campaigns where he was immensely successful in being reelected.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about this primary that you would like to add that you do feel is important?
Right when you got to the end there, I would just, point out that basically the race is now down to essentially two major candidates on the Republican side, and the lack of Democratic primary is going to be what helps drive undeclared voters to pull a ballot in the Republican primary, and that could boost Nikki Haley's numbers.